Sunday night's Giants-Bills matchup is going to be a get-right game for one of the two teams. Can that be the Giants? We're going to go over the key storylines, matchups, concerns, and much more on this special crossover edition of Locked On Giants and Locked On Bills coming your way next.
You are Locked On Giants, your daily New York Giants podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
This crossover Thursday episode is brought to you by Prize Picks, the easiest and most exciting way to play daily fantasy sports. Go to prizepicks.com/LockedOnNFL and use code LockedOnNFL for a first deposit match up to $100. I'm Joe Marino, host of the Locked On Bills podcast, joined by Patricia Traina, the host of the Locked On Giants podcast. We're here to get you ready for Sunday Night Football in Orchard Park, Week 6, Bills versus Giants. And Patty, I'm very excited to talk about this football game with you and get some perspective on the Giants, a team that is reeling, right? It's a reeling football team that certainly had a great season last year, but it has not quite gotten off to the start I think Brian Daboll and company wanted.
No, definitely not. This is not what we saw in the spring. This isn't what we saw in the summer. And it's got all of us who watched this and reported on this and got excited about this wondering if maybe we were reporting on fool's gold, and it certainly looks that way. The Giants are banged up. They are missing, the worst possible players that they shouldn't, that they absolutely need. You can't be without an Andrew Thomas. You can't be without a Saquon Barkley. All right, those two guys alone, to be missing both of them, totally changes the complexion of this football team, particularly the offense. The defense is still, lacking a bite for some reason. It just hasn't been that all out us versus you mentality. And just this whole team, the offensive line has been a disaster. I mean, everything that can go wrong has gone wrong with this team. And, you look at the top storylines for it, you got to look at the injuries, particularly Daniel Jones now is a question mark to play on Sunday. He is dealing with a neck injury suffered last week at the hands of his offensive line, which can't block for, anything. So we don't know what's going to happen there. I don't think Jones is going to be ready to play. I hope I'm wrong, but I'm not getting a warm and fuzzy feeling about it. Barkley may or may not be back, but do you really want to put him back behind that offensive line, which is going to undergo another shift? I don't know that you want to do that. Darren Waller is banged up. He's got a groin injury, but he should be good to go. I mean, just so many injuries. And Andrew Thomas, forget about it. He's not going to be in the lineup. So just, a mash unit for the Giants. And I just don't see a path to victory for this team. I mean, I'm normally very optimistic. My listeners know that, but I don't see how they overcome these injuries.
Yeah, I think this could very much be the wrong opponent at the wrong time for the Giants in this game. We're obviously going to talk about it and get into all the details, but this game, when it was on the schedule, was a lot different, right? With Brian Daboll, homecoming type situation, going back to Western New York. We know that he's from the area, had a very successful run as the Bills offensive coordinator, and now it's just not that at all, right? I mean, it's very much the attrition that the Giants have already experienced this year, and how can they kind of get through it? And it's going to be an uphill climb, obviously, against a good Bills football team that's coming off of a disappointing loss. And so before I get into the Bills' biggest storyline, I would like to ask you a question about the quarterback situation, because we know Daniel Jones didn't finish the last game, a neck injury, was limited in practice, but we know that quarterbacks, they don't have to take any contact. So there's some dynamics there. What are your expectations for Daniel Jones? And if it has to be Tyrod Taylor, how does that change this game for you?
Yeah, Daniel didn't practice at all on Wednesday. And as you pointed out, the quarterbacks are in the red jersey, so they don't really have to worry about contact. The Giants haven't been practicing in pads anyway because, they're so banged up. They just don't have enough bodies to practice in pads. I mean, I suppose you could always be afraid of the incidental contact, but, I don't see that happening. And plus, last time Daniel dealt with a neck injury, he was able to go out there and throw the ball. So that is concerning. That's why I don't have a warm and fuzzy feeling about it. Tyrod Taylor, if he has to go in, I'm a little nervous about that. Tyrod, can do all the things that, Daniel can do. The problem with Tyrod is every time he goes in there, it seems he gets some kind of injury. He went in against Miami to finish out the game, had the wind knocked out of him. Okay, so that wasn't too bad. But behind that offensive line is really, really bad right now. And they're looking at another combination to start the game. This would be starting combination 6. All right. How are you supposed to build any kind of continuity, any type of communication? I mean, they're now pulling guys in off the street to staff this offensive line because these young guys, next man up and all that stuff, they're just not getting it done. So, Tyrod Taylor, I don't know that it necessarily changes things that much because the offensive line is just such a big question mark. I don't think they're going to be able to get a whole lot done.
Yeah, it's unfortunate. It's tough to really evaluate what's going on with the Giants in year 2 with Joe Shane and Brian Daboll, just given the dynamics of the injuries, because who could be successful under these circumstances? Now, when it comes to the Buffalo Bills and the lead story here, I think it's about bouncing back. Obviously, they went to London and didn't have the game they were hoping to against the Jacksonville Jaguars, falling 25-20. Some really unique circumstances with Jacksonville playing the week before in London and being there for 12 days. And then the Bills get there on Friday morning, and you could tell they were a tired football team that didn't meet the moment. But if there's anything the Bills have been good at under Sean McDermott, it's bouncing back. Since 2020, which is pretty much where I would consider the Bills at the moment where they ascended as one of the better teams in the league. They are 10-3 following a loss, which is the second best win percentage in the league, and just one of 4 teams with a win percentage above 70% coming off of a loss over that stretch. Not to mention they have the best average margin of victory coming off of a loss at 12.2, and number 2 is 8.2, a pretty big lead there. So the Bills typically don't let one loss count twice, right? They usually bounce back very well. Obviously a home primetime game against a team that they're favored right now to beat by 2 touchdowns, right? That's the spread right now. So obviously this is you look at it and you hate to say it, but it feels like a get right opportunity for the Bills. But that also comes with some nerves, right? Because you're expected to go out and perform at a certain level and handle your business and, do so in pretty convincing fashion. And then if that doesn't happen, then you got a different conversation, right? So there's a little bit of anxiousness that comes with it. Now, I know that talking to Giants fans who are obviously listening to this podcast about injuries is going to fall. You're not going to be impressed with the Bills' injuries, but they do have some injuries of their own. Obviously, over the last couple of weeks, some very, very critical pieces of the defense. Tre'Davious White went down 2 weeks ago against Miami. And then in that London game, Matt Milano, who's an all-pro linebacker, and Daquan Jones, who's probably been the Bills' best defensive tackle this year, or best defensive lineman this year, probably out for the season, certainly not playing against the Giants. And so this is really your first game without Milano, without Jones, and who knows about another starting cornerback, Dane Jackson, another starting defensive lineman, Greg Rousseau. So there are injuries. Now, fortunately for the Bills, they have depth. There's a lot of players that have been asked to play that are going to step in for these guys, but this is that first game without Matt Milano, without Daquan Jones, and they're going to have to right the ship and, next man up. Nobody cares about your problems in the NFL, right? Nobody cares. And that's just the reality of it. Nobody in the NFC East is sitting around feeling bad for the Giants because they have a bunch of injuries to their offensive line, right? Nobody is. That's the reality of the league. And so the Bills are going to have to really embrace that next man up mentality and, try to get this season where it needs to go after a very convincing 3-game winning streak following their week 1 loss to the Jets. We'll see how they bounce back this time around following a loss to the Jaguars. All right, in just a second here, Patricia and I are going to talk about the key matchups in this game that will decide the game. But first, I need to tell you about Prize Picks. You got to check them out, folks. Prize Picks is the funnest, most exciting, easiest way to play daily fantasy sports. The format is awesome. It's just you versus the numbers. It's not you versus thousands of other players, including pros and including sharks. It's you versus the numbers. All you do is you select 2 or more players, you pick more or less on their projected stats, and you place your entry. That's it. Doesn't take long. You can make an entry in under a minute, and when you win, the withdrawals are super, super quick and easy. I love watching sports. I love it even more when I have a Prize Picks entry going into a game. It just makes it that much more exciting. So go to prizepicks.com, prizepicks.com/LockedOnNFL and use code LockedOnNFL for a first deposit match up to $100. Again, that's prizepicks.com/LockedOnNFL for a first deposit match up to $100. Prize Picks, daily fantasy sports made easy. All right, Patricia, we're going to get into the matchups that can decide the game. I felt like I just spoke forever there, getting into the Bills side of things and, of course, telling everyone about Prize Picks. So when you consider these key matchups, what's that first thing that comes to mind for you that's going to be critical for Sunday night?
There's a couple, actually, that I'm looking at. Stephon Diggs can do some really bad damage against the secondary. Now, the Giants' defensive secondary, is still relatively young. You've got Deonte Banks, who, by the way, I think was on the injury report this week. They mix in Trey Hawkins there. Adoree Jackson, obviously, he's a veteran. But the Giants, they've just been giving up chunk plays. And last week against Miami, it was like a track meet. The Dolphins were getting huge, huge gains. I think they had something like, I want to say 8 big plays of 20 or more yards in the passing game, but Diggs worries me. So that would be one matchup for sure that I'm curious to see whether they have Adoree Jackson travel with Diggs or, how exactly are they going to play him? All right. Now, the other thing that I'm curious, I'm going to go a little outside the box here if I can. Ken Dorsey, I believe, is the Bills' offensive coordinator. He coached under Brian Daboll. So I'm kind of curious to see, when it's all said and done, how much of the Bills' offense is going to kind of match what, maybe Daboll did and how the Giants counter against it. So that's another, a chess match that's going to go on there. Josh Allen, a very good quarterback, can make all the throws. He's got a number one receiver. He's got everything he needs. They've got a better offensive line than the Giants. So that's a matchup I'm definitely keeping an eye on.
Yeah, it's a fun dynamic here with obviously Josh Allen spending the first, 4 or 5 years of his career with Brian Daboll. And Josh came out this week and said that the person that he gives the most credit to, the most influence in his glow up as a top NFL quarterback, he attributed that to Brian Daboll, and it's the same playbook. It really is. They certainly built on it, and Ken Dorsey has added his own wrinkles, but Ken Dorsey was the quarterback's coach under Brian Daboll for several of those seasons. And so it's going to be interesting, just given the amount of intel that exists on the Giants side of things. You mentioned Brian Daboll. I know Shea Tierney was a quarterback's coach for Buffalo as well. So there's that piece of it. Bobby Johnson was the offensive line coach. A lot of players as well. Isaiah Hodgins, right? There's a lot of those players that were plucked off of the Bills, right? Matt Breida, most of those being offensive guys, but there's a level of intel that you feel like the Giants probably have in this game that should help them. Now, what's interesting is the Bills made a very big fundamental shift, though, offensively. While they're still running a lot of the Daboll concepts, they're now a 2 tight end offense. They are 12 personnel pretty much 50-60% of the time with Dawson Knox and Dalton Kincaid on the field. And so that's a really different approach to a similar style of offense. And so that's definitely a very interesting matchup. I had Josh Allen against the Giants written down as one of my key matchups. And, obviously those offensive players won't be on the field at the same time as Josh Allen, but there's still a level of knowledge that exists there. But like you mentioned with the Giants, their defense hasn't really found itself yet. But when I do evaluate the Giants, I feel like that's where the concentration of talent is. You still have Dexter Lawrence, who I think is playing at a high level this year. Got a big contract. He deserved it. He's a tough matchup for anybody in the middle of the offensive line. And, be a big assignment for Osiris Torrance and Mitch Morris and Connor McGovern in the middle there. Also Leonard Williams, I think one of the better defensive linemen in the NFL. So a couple guys there. I don't think Kayvon Thibodeau is having his best go at the season yet, but we certainly know the talent that he has as a recent top 10 pick. Xavier McKinney, one of my favorite defensive backs in the NFL. A lot of versatility. You know that he's going to be an important chess piece for Wink Martindale. Bobby Okereke's a good linebacker. You mentioned Adoree Jackson, first-round pick, and Deonte Banks. I feel like there's some talent there on that defensive side of the football, and I think as I've studied the Giants this week in preparation, my disappointment has been with the defense. Like, it's hard to really go in on the offense like we talked about. There's so many injuries. It's tough. But the defense has been pretty much together year 2 with Wink with some reinforcements, right? And so that's where I feel like it's going to wake up at some point. They're right there. They have to play better at some point. Is it going to be this week against the Bills? I don't know if that's the right opponent at the right time, but it is something that I feel like the Giants can lean on as they look for their path to win the game. It's leaning on those talented players on defense, some very handsomely paid players on defense with some good intel to give them a chance to slow down the Bills offense, which is off to a good start this year.
Yeah, the Giant defense, hasn't been horrible. I mean, they haven't been great, don't get me wrong, but compared to the other 2 units on the team, the defense, I would say, is probably the least of the concerns right now. Now, that being said, the pass rush is just not getting there. We know Wink Martindale likes to blitz. I don't know that, you could do that against every single quarterback, because at some point that is going to come back to bite you, especially when you have a young secondary that's still kind of cutting its teeth. But again, the thing that I've noticed most about the Giants defense that has me concerned is they're just lacking that bite, that dog mentality. We saw it last year where guys were just, flocking to the ball. They were making plays. They were snarling, to borrow a line from the Lions, they were biting off kneecaps. We don't see that really this year, and I'm really not sure why or what's missing. It's not like they're really banged up on that side of the ball. Azeez Ojulari, the outside linebacker, probably won't play this week. He's got an ankle injury, which means Kayvon Thibodeau now, does he go back to, being in coverage more like he was when Ojulari was out in the beginning part of the year, or do they do something a little different? But yeah, I mean, the other thing with the Giants defense that I just don't understand is their run defense has been horrible. They put all this money, this investment. They brought in Bobby Okereke, as you mentioned, Joaquin Nunes-Roches. They brought in Ashawn Robinson, and they still can't stop the run. So I'm not really sure if they're just giving up, the run, to protect the young defensive secondary, or if they legitimately still have a problem. But the run defense has just not been good this year.
One other matchup that I want to bring up, and that I'd actually like to ask you about a couple of players, and I'll go ahead and tell you who those players are. Isaiah Hodgins and Boogie Basham, 2 players that went over fairly recently that I know Bills Mafia has some interest in, and so I'd love to kind of get an update on both of those guys. But it kind of goes without stating, when you talk about key matchups that are going to decide this game, it's the Bills D-line against the Giants offensive line, right? The Bills D-line, certainly some injuries there, but certainly plenty of talent that should be able to take advantage of a Giants offensive line that has injuries, has guys playing out of position. I mean, Josh Ezeudu is not a left tackle. He's playing left tackle. We'll see if John Michael Schmitz can go at center this week, but if Ben Bredesen has to go there again, he really struggled against Miami. The one starter they do have is Evan Neal, and I mean, we all know how much he struggled for as many pressures. I think I saw this week, the Giants have given up 29 sacks this year in 5 games. Tons of pressures, and like 25% of those pressures are coming from Evan Neal, the guy that's, the prized top pick in year 2. You're expecting growth, and that just hasn't happened. So it goes without stating, the Bills defensive line against the Giants offensive line is a big matchup, and one that the Bills need to take advantage of. So Patricia, what can you tell us? Boogie Basham, Isaiah Hodgins, what do Bills Mafia need to know about how things are going with them in New York?
Boogie Basham thus far, kind of a non-factor. I don't want to say invisible, but I'm not sure they've figured out exactly what his role is. They're still kind of feeling it out a little bit. Maybe he's still learning the defense. I don't know. Isaiah Hodgins is kind of interesting. He was a big part of the offense last year, and he's kind of taken a back seat. And again, I question if the Giants just have too many guys. I know that sounds weird, but they went and they splurged on all these receivers. They brought in a gazillion slot receivers for that short passing game, intermediate passing game, pick up yards after the catch. And Isaiah Hodgins has kind of been an afterthought. And I'm really not sure why. Is it something in his skill set? I mean, he's not somebody who's going to, separate, by big gobs, but he's got sure hands. He runs smart routes. He knows the offense really well. But yet he's just kind of been an afterthought in this offense. And, I look at this Giants offense and I'm really not sure what their identity is. Whereas last year you kind of had a peek at what the identity was going to be. But again, ever since Saquon went out with his injury, it's like they're just throwing darts at blindfolded.
Well, I think a big part of your identity is supposed to be Andrew Thomas and Saquon Barkley, and those guys haven't been available. And I think that takes away from everything with what you're trying to accomplish offensively. And we certainly saw what Isaiah Hodgins did last year down the stretch, a big part of the Giants getting to the postseason and winning a playoff game. And Bills fans are wondering, well, did they make a mistake? I can't believe they let Isaiah Hodgins get away. And then this year comes along and he's been quiet. I don't think he had a touchdown in week 1, but since then, I mean, has he had more than a catch in a game? It's been pretty quiet for him. So appreciate the update there. In just a second here, Patricia and I are going to discuss the path to victory for both sides of this matchup and, of course, give you a little score prediction. So that's coming up here in just a moment. But first, need to tell you about Jase Medical. Everyone should be empowered to care for themselves and their loved ones during the unexpected, and that's why Jase Medical offers the Jase Case. The Jase Case provides 5 life-saving antibiotics for emergency use and gives you a peace of mind so that you're not just hoping that you have access to medication in an emergency. Jase Medical makes sure that you have the medication in hand. Jase Medical is simple. They handle everything from the online evaluation to licensed pharmacy medication delivery and ongoing consultation and care. So don't get caught unprepared. Get $20 off these life-saving antibiotics today from Jase Medical by using our promo code LOCKEDON at checkout on jasemedical.com. That's JASE medical.com. All right, Patricia, let's get into it. What's the keys? What are the keys to victory? What has to go right that would lead to a major Giants upset win in Orchard Park on Sunday Night Football?
Getting Andrew Thomas back, getting Saquon Barkley back, just rewinding the tape back to the summer when the Giants offense looked so promising. I mean, really, that it's that bad, Joe. It's that bad with this Giants offense. They can't compete. They just cannot compete. That offensive line is a disaster. That offensive lines, ideally, you want to have continuity on the line.
Yeah.
They can't block worth spit, which I just don't understand. Because what have they been doing in practice all this time? It's the same mistakes. Forget about it. If you ask them to pick up a stunt, they can't do that either, which I still don't understand why that is. I know a lot of people down here, a lot of Giant fans are calling for Bobby Johnson's head. I understand he wasn't really popular when he was with the Bills.
Right. Yeah. We were happy to see him go. So,
yeah. For the Giants to win this game, the bottom line is they have to play a perfect game. They're not good enough to overcome their mistakes.
Yeah.
And you know what? I don't see them playing a perfect game. They're missing too many key players. I don't think Daniel Jones is going to play again. I'd be surprised if he plays. I don't know if Saquon will be back. I mean, quite honestly, I wouldn't blame, the staff if they held him out, given the offensive line. The Giants need to be perfect or close to it. And I just don't think they can do it because, all it takes is one mistake and then everything just falls apart and we're right back to where we started from and things get ugly again. So I don't mean to be a downer, but I'm being real here. Giants need a perfect game and I don't see it coming.
Well, it's interesting because when I consider the path to victory for the Buffalo Bills, the number one thing that I have written down is take care of the football, right? I think this is a game where it feels like you have the opportunity to overmatch the Giants. And the last thing you want to do is give them extra possessions and give them life. And what's interesting about me saying that is the Giants won the turnover battle last week against Miami 3-0. It was the first 3 takeaways the Giants had all season long, which pretty much blew my mind. They hadn't been able to get a takeaway. They get 3 against Miami and still lose by 2 scores. And so that's not typically a recipe that's going to lose you football games. And maybe that speaks to kind of the situation with the Giants right now. But I think for a Bills team that was looking to bounce back, I do think that they need to make sure they take care of the football and not give any life to the Giants, which leads me to my second point, which is to be aggressive early in this football game. You want to make the Giants one-dimensional on offense. And if you can build a lead and force them into having to throw the football, that's going to exacerbate the issues that they already have with the offensive line. And so if you can get a lead and tee off on the offensive line, that's going to make for probably a long day for the Giants offense. And then number 3 is winning in the trenches. You should be able to. You are mostly healthy in that capacity, and the Giants are not. And so while I think there's a clear advantage with the Bills D-line against the Giants offensive line, given the state of the injuries. And the Bills have the highest sack percentage in the NFL, the least highest blitz percentage. They're rushing the passer very, very well. Von Miller is back. This is his second game back. He should ramp up. there's a lot of good things happening there. But you definitely need to win there. But on the other side of things, we talked about it. The Giants have talent on that defensive line, and Leonard Williams and Dexter Lawrence, Kayvon Thibodeau, whoever else is going to be available. But those guys should be around, and you have to make sure that they don't wreck your game because those guys are big time talents on the defensive line, and so that'll be a big order for the Bills' offensive line. So that's what I think is important for the Bills. Take care of the ball, be aggressive, try to make them one-dimensional, and win in the trenches. And that probably leads to a Bills win on Sunday Night Football. And they make us do it. We got to predict the game here. So, Patricia, the over-under on this game as of now is 45. The current betting line is Bills minus 14. What do you see happening?
I think they'll cover that. I really do. I mean, the Giants are averaging 11 points a game, somewhere, or maybe 11.4, something like that.
Yeah.
They can't score. They cannot score. They can't sustain drives. They can't move the ball. And then when they do move the ball, something happens and everything goes poof, So, I don't see the Giants scoring 20 points. I just don't see it. I don't think they get to 20. I'm going to say the Giants, I'm going to be generous because I'm in a generous move. I'm going to give the Giants at least 2 touchdowns. I'm going to say 14, but I think the Bills are going to score. I don't think it's going to be too outlandish to predict they score 40. So, that's how concerned I am about this team. I mean, it's going to be the Bills covering that spread easily. So let's say 40-14.
Yeah. Well, I have it something like that. I think the Bills get into the mid to high 30s, and I think that the Giants kind of hang out in the teens. But it's one of those deals like, here's what I hate to bring this up, but think about Dallas, right? Dallas went to Arizona, and they lost that game, and nobody thought that was going to happen. And we know that the Giants, Daniel Jones got superpowers in the second half against Arizona, and they won the game, right? I mean, so this game, for as much as this has been a conversation that's very much about, it feels like from both sides of this, that the Bills should go handle their business. They got to go play the game, and it has to play out. And, the Giants have 53 NFL players on their roster, just like the Buffalo Bills do. And so, this isn't a situation where anything can be taken for granted. Yeah, the Bills are heavy favorites. Everybody understands why, but they're going to play the game, and everyone has to go out and execute and do what's necessary. And so if the Bills get caught feeling sorry for themselves, they lost a couple of players on defense, like maybe the Cowboys did, right? They lose Trayvon Diggs during the week in practice. All of a sudden they go to Arizona and look terrible. And so that's the concern. That's the part where you're a little anxious on the Bills side of things as well. You better take this seriously or else you're going to lose. And we know, Brian Daboll doesn't want to lose this game, for all the storylines with Josh Allen, with Sean McDermott, even some potential, kind of at the end of the road there with Sean McDermott and Brian Daboll. Maybe there's a little friction. I believe there was, so you got some prideful dudes here and nobody wants to lose. And so I think you're going to see a real honest effort on both sides of the equation. And, I'm sure for non-Bills fans, everybody would like to see a competitive game. It's a primetime game, right? Everyone's going to be watching. And so we'll see how it all plays out. It's the NFL, and they don't say any given Sunday for no reason.
Exactly. I mean, you never know. Maybe the Giants find this is their get right game. I don't think it happens, but you never know. That's why you line up, and that's why you play the game.
You got it. All right, everybody. Thank you so much for tuning into this crossover Thursday here on the Locked On Podcast Network. She's Patricia Traina from Locked On Giants. I'm Joe Marino from Locked On Bills. Still plenty of coverage left this week to get everyone ready for Sunday Night Football. So make sure that you are paying attention to what's going on in both podcast feeds. Make sure that you take a second to rate, review, share, and subscribe. Have a great rest of your day, and we look forward to catching up with you again real soon.